All right. Let's just start at the beginning. Yeah? Deal. Let's just see what happens. Yeah. That was punny, wasn't it? Yeah. So just ponder, why would you begin this work in this way? Yeah? In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. 2 + 2 = 5, apparently. He, that is the Word, was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. In him was life, and the life was the light. Do you see the linking of the metaphors right there? The light is the life. It's a little decoder ring. Whenever you read through the gospel and you see life, think light. And when you see light, think life. The life was the light of humans. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness did not comprehend it. This New American Standard, or some of your translations have, didn't overtake it or overcome it. So opening paragraph. Whose personal name has not been named? So that's it. So remember, think through the purpose statement. So this whole thing is written so that you trust in Jesus, the Messiah. And obviously this is about that person, but that person is not named by the name given by their human parents. Here, this figure, the subject of the whole book, is just called God's Word. What an image. This itself is just a bottomless well you could think about for a long time. So how do you get a handle on this kind of thing? Just think, John's a communicator. He actually wants to communicate with you, right? He's not trying to just be puzzling for puzzling's sake. So with the first 3 words, what's he doing to you? So he's inviting you to consider the first 3 words of the Bible, of his Bible, which is the Hebrew Scriptures. So the first sentences of Genesis. What's the effect of that? What he wants to start his work the same way that the storyline of the Hebrew Bible starts. So that's kind of a bold claim. If my first words when I got up here this morning were 70 years ago, right? That would be a bold claim that would communicate all kinds of things. That I think of myself as an Abraham Lincoln type of person. The things that I'm about to say to you are as important as what, right, Abraham Lincoln said in that speech. Are you with me? It's communicating more than just the words. It's communicating. So it's very similar here. So the story about this person is another story of creation. It's as important or as significant as the creation moment. The person that we're going to meet in this story of this book has a really unique kind of relationship to the person who started the story on page 1 of Genesis, yeah? And notice how the language is grammatically correct and logically category shattering, right? Because the figure who's there in the beginning is called the Word. The Greek, you know the Greek word, logos. So, or logos, depending on who your Greek teacher was, logos or logos. So you're introduced to the logos, and then the logos is simultaneously God. So who's that? What's that activating from page 1 of the Bible? Just to remind you, what's the 4th word of the Bible? In the beginning, God. In Hebrew, the word order is different, but same basic idea. The first person you meet in the storyline of Genesis in the beginning is God. And what John wants to claim is that you're reading a story that's equally as significant as the story of creation. In fact, it's the fulfillment of the story of creation. And the person he wants to introduce you to is the Word. Okay, who is that? Well, let me say it this way. The Word is that God who's referred to on page 1 of Genesis. And the Word is distinct from the God on page 1 of Genesis. How you doing? So the Word is that God that you met on page 1 and simultaneously distinct from that God. So he is creating with this sentence a space in your brain for an utterly unique type of being who is going to become human in verse 14. The Word becomes a human. And then, of course, he's going to attach then the name Jesus to that human. So many things happening here. He's trying to account and think from the perspective of the end here. This is John talking about the man Jesus of Nazareth that he met. And he's trying to reframe how you think about this. And the man that we hung out with, named Jesus of Nazareth, there's so much more than meets the eye. The only adequate way to really wrap our minds around him is to go back to page 1 and insert Jesus right into the very being of God on page 1. And the Jesus that we met was meeting God. But at the same time, Jesus referred to God as someone distinct from himself. What's in the Gospel of John? What does Jesus always call God? Sometimes he calls God, God, just a few times. Mostly he calls God my Father. So he calls himself the Son, and he calls God my Father. And John's going to invite us. It's going to come to a culminating point right here in the prayer in 17, that for John, the word God is using the Jewish categories from the Hebrew Scriptures, but a dramatic development has happened in his understanding of the word God. Namely, that you've got my Father, you've got the Son, and you've got the Spirit. All three of these are connected as simultaneously God and distinct from each other in this story. And that all three of these existing together as one is what the word God means in the Gospel of John. How you doing? I mean, I know we're simultaneously here and here at the same time, but this is all how it's going to come together. And so it's from this perspective that he's trying to frame it. And so he uses the first sentences of Genesis to introduce you. So we're going to go right here to the Word. So he's already trying to reframe even what the word God means for you. My hunch, this is its own category of being, right? This being. This is certainly not what comes into people's minds when you use the word God in your church community. Unless they've really gotten things, then maybe they're on the road. But my hunch is that the majority of people, this is very difficult to reshape the meaning of the word God. It's one of the most difficult tasks, I think. But it's one main mission of the Gospel of John is to redefine what that word even means, because it refers to this being who is one and more than one at the same time. How you guys doing? So that accounts for this, what seems to us the illogic of the sentence. It's grammatically correct, but from our perspective of what it means to be a person cannot be a person and be distinct from that person at the same time. Like that's not quite how you and I exist in the world. But apparently that's the kind of being that God is. And that's the God that's revealed here. Okay, so what John he's going to also give us some anchors to wrap our minds around this. And the first place he goes is the Psalms and the Proverbs. You may not know it, But he's also pulling on the Psalms and the Proverbs. So this is I'm going to the John handout here. Page 3 and following is all about the prologue to John. So look at this. He's simultaneously activating multiple hyperlinks. It's like a Wikipedia page. Actually, the whole New Testament is like a Wikipedia page. And there'll just be little words or phrases that if you are a Hebrew Bible nerd, like the apostles are, you'll just see words pop in blue, and then you can go through. So in the beginning, we notice that hyperlink. But the idea of a word that's with God in the beginning, those pop blue also to Proverbs chapter 8. You know Proverbs chapter 8? Oh, dude. Proverbs chapter 8. So here's all we're going to say is that there is wisdom is depicted poetically as a character in the book of Proverbs as Lady Wisdom. And Lady Wisdom talks about herself as being in the beginning, being the attribute by which Yahweh architected and created the universe. And so wisdom in Proverbs 8 talks about being with Yahweh in the beginning, being a co-worker, rejoicing in God as he created the world. It's really remarkable. So Proverbs 8 is also giving us a category of an attribute of God, God's wisdom, that God employs. And when you're just reading Proverbs 8, you're like, oh, that's incredible poetry. It's really amazing personification to portray wisdom that way. And John's using Proverbs 8 and applying it to his grid of Jesus as God and distinct from God at the same time. Are you with me? So he's using the categories of Proverbs 8 to as a way, especially of communicating to a biblically literate audience about this. The problem in a modern Western audience is that like people aren't Bible nerds, you know? Like in a Jewish audience, people who grew up going to synagogue, right? This hyperlink just does a whole bunch of things immediately. In our context, we have to go and explain Proverbs 8 because nobody knows Proverbs 8. Are you with me? So that's a challenge. And that's a communication challenge. It's just something you've got to work with. But that's what John's doing. Is talking about. So what he's activating here is that the word is God and is distinct from God. And to do that, he uses language of God's wisdom. Notice also this concept of word. So sorry, here, let's go here. This is Proverbs chapter 8. Now the word, why do you think he's using word to talk about Jesus? The pre-existent Jesus. In Genesis, what is God's means by which, right? Okay, so God said. So 10 acts of speaking in Genesis 1 are the means by which he brings order to the wild waste here from verse 2. So God speaks. And then this narrative was pondered and meditated upon by many later biblical authors and developed. So Psalm 33 is a really important poem because it's a poetic meditation on if Genesis 1 is saying something true about our world and about God, it's reflecting. What more does that mean about the world? So it's a praise psalm, praising God for his, Psalm 33, praise God for his word. His word, because it's upright. Everything God does is an expression of his covenant love. He loves righteousness and justice. If the earth came into being through his word, it means the earth is an expression of his covenant love. Isn't that a beautiful concept, Psalm 33. And then look at this meditation on Genesis 1. By the word of Yahweh the heavens were made, by the breath of his mouth all their host. So it's and also breath. If even a intermediate Bible nerd, you know breath in Hebrew? Ruach is the same word for spirit. So by means of word and spirit, and the images are connected, because what are you doing when you speak words? You're uttering your ruach. So already on Genesis 1, you have an image of God creating by means of his word. Oh yeah, and who's in sentence 2 of Genesis 1? This poet's not just making all this up. What did this poet notice in the second sentence of the Bible? The breath of God, God's ruach. So right here in the first sentences, you have God and the personal presence of God, the Spirit, and God's word. And John's activating all of this here, just in these little subtle hyperlinks here through Psalm 33, Proverbs 8, Genesis 1, boom. So this is the Rembrandt type of thing. We're like 4 sentences in, right? It's taking us 15 minutes. But that's how this thing works. Every single movement of the Gospel of John works in a similar way. So what you would want to do from here then is, even though the word spirit hasn't occurred, it's now in your mental furniture because it's in the hyperlinks that he's activated. Spirit, word, wisdom. And so what you would want to do, I won't do it right now, but would be to put on your spirit glasses. And then all of a sudden, a whole bunch of key texts in 4 and 7, and then 14 through 16 are going to light up. And then it's going to culminate with Jesus breathing on the disciples, the risen Jesus breathing on the disciples here. Are you with me? It's like the spirit word breathing thread. He speaks and breathes on his disciples. Right? That's so good. Okay. John. Let's keep going. Now, so Jesus is light and life. Let's get those other ones. So Jesus is word. He's also light. We talked about that. Light. And notice how light is equated with these 2 little lines. It means parallel. Light is equated with life here. But notice that the light is put, so there you go, the word. By means of the word, God created everything. Good news? Hooray! The world exists. And then the light, the word is God's life and light the light shines. Yeah? Hooray! But where does the light shine? Why do you need light? Yeah, things are dark. In fact, notice in the first sentence, it talks about the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness was not able to do something, right? And it depends on your translation. Don Carson or one of these commentators will have a long discussion on it. But the darkness is trying to envelop or overtake the light in some way, which is signaling that there's going to be some kind of conflict. A conflict between light and dark. So the darkness is trying to overtake the light. It can't ultimately conquer, but the light is invading the darkness. Yeah? Which is a way of thinking about Genesis 1, that God invades the darkness with his light and word and with his life. Now notice what he equated light with life, and then he created an opposition between light and darkness. It's like a little logical chart here. So what is implied here that he hasn't used the word yet? You're tracking here. So death. So the light and darkness is mapped onto life and death. To see the light is to embrace life. To reject the light is to sit in the darkness, is to sit in death. That's implied here. And again, he's planting keywords and ideas that are just going to echo throughout all of these stories that come along here. Okay. That's the opening paragraph. Now, so the reason why we're spending time here is because you would think that the opening paragraph would be like the most clear thing. Yeah? And in this case, the opening paragraph is like a riddle. And it's a riddle that will repay meditation as you read through the rest of the book now. And then come back to the opening lines, and then you'll be like, oh, so good. So good. The light and the dark thing from this story totally makes sense of why he did it there, and how darkness gets equated with death and sin and judgment in the story of the healing of the blind man. Boom. So it's a lot like that. So I think that's you have to get creative. In any class or in any sermon series, you have to think about some kind of introductory statement, whether it's a message, whether it's opening class. How are you going to bring people in? And simply reading the first paragraph is awesome. And you're going to finish reading it and no one's going to have any clue what's happening. Are you with me? So that's a unique challenge. So here would be, I'm activating the sermon series idea. My hunch is that if in some opening message needs to both talk about concluding this right here, and to introduce people to the story here. So my recommendation would be to give some kind of message or teaching where you begin at the ending and the beginning in the same teaching. And kind of like what I just did in the first session, because just to start here, Jesus isn't even mentioned in the opening paragraph by his name. And so, you guys get my point here. So I think if you begin with, why does this book exist in the New Testament? Oh, yay, so the author told us. And the author could have written the book in many different ways, but it's particularly written this way. And maybe put a Rembrandt in front of people. And then you can read that first paragraph and show people some hyperlinks and just say, yeah, this is what it's going to be like as we read through the book. But that would be my recommendation for like an opening message. So it would be choosing some part of the opening paragraph plus the double conclusion of 20, 30, and 31, and 21. I always forget what the final verse numbers are for 21. It's 24 and 25. So it's essentially, it would be teaching the purpose statement of the book, and inviting people to meet and trust the Jesus they will encounter as they read this gospel. Does that make sense? So it's kind of a meta message about the book and how it works. Although you might find a more creative way to just dive in from the beginning and do that too. And if so, let me know how that goes for you and how you do that, because I would be interested to know. So that's how the opening paragraph works. So here's what John's done in the rest of the introduction, the way he's framed the book. We did that. I just wanted to give you an example of the Rembrandt portrait. I want to now move out and just show you a couple anchors for how he's designed the book to work as a whole. And then I think that'll help us as we come out and finish the rest of the introduction. Does that sound good? Okay. So the rest of the introduction works is he's going to begin the narrative proper by introducing us to John the Baptist. He's going to go through John the Baptist and how let John the Baptist set the stage for the entry of Jesus, who's going to come, and John's going to announce him. And then John's famously going to call Jesus what when he sees him? He's going to call him the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world. Then the rest of the introduction is about the effectiveness of John's testimony. It's going to be all these people who started following Jesus because of what John did. And that is going to be the gathering of the first disciples. Now, I just want to point out one little comment here. This is in chapter 1. John tells us where John the Baptist was baptizing. Chapter 1, verse 28. He tells us a story about John, and then he just says, oh, hey, sorry, you guys should know, this was all happening in a place called Bethany. And then he just moves on. You're like, okay, it's interesting, right? So you tuck that away. So this whole narrative scene here, after the opening paragraph, is about John the B. We're just going to call him JB in this opening section. And he just tells you right here, Bethany. And actually, this is Richard Balcom has a whole essay on this. This has puzzled people for many generations of scholars, because up in the Jordan, in that northern part of the Jordan, there's no record of any town named Bethany proper, but there is a little region that in Aramaic was called Bethaniah. Bethaniah. But John has spelled it with the name Bethany. Why did he do that? Well, is Bethany as a name of a place going to appear in any other moments in the story? Yes, indeed. In fact, it's precisely at the middle transition story, which takes place in the town of Bethany, the actual town of Bethany that's outside of Jerusalem. So Richard Baucham's observation, and it's been accepted in commentaries after he made the point, is that he's actually intentionally misspelled the name of this place to match the name of this place to create a literary borderline in the narrative. Are you with me? So this sounds enough like the name of the actual place that readers would be like, oh, that's good. The two Bethanys. The two Bethanies. And here it's John the Baptist's testimony that points people to Jesus. Here it's the miracle that Jesus performs that testifies. It's the final act of testimony in the narrative that points to who Jesus is. Here it gets people to follow him. Here Jesus' testimony sets in motion the machine that's going to kill him. Because the healing of Lazarus is the thing that puts the target on his back in John's narrative. Because the Pharisees want to kill him. So the two Bethanies. So what that tells us is when John tells us information about where events take place, that's important. It's going to function as some kind of marker in the narrative. So when going back to, that was in chapter 1 that the Bethany thing happened. As we move on at the end of chapter 1, the opening is concluded, and the next narrative is about a wedding that takes place where? Cana. So the opening narrative takes place at Cana. And here John's going to tell us 4 stories that follow here, actually 5 stories, in 4 blocks though, of Jesus, something happening with Jesus, where Jesus is going to do or say something in the presence or in association with some like classic Jewish institution or cultural symbol. So here it's a Jewish wedding, for goodness sakes. The chuppah, I don't know if the stomping glass, I don't know how ancient that practice is, right? But the chuppah, the wedding tent, is really ancient. So, but the whole thing about the wine and the wedding, what follows from that, it's a story about temple. Doesn't get any more classic Jewish symbol than that. Then Jesus has a nighttime conversation with a rabbi, right? Then Jesus goes to a sacred well that's connected with Jacob as he talks with the Samaritan woman here, the estranged brothers or kinsmen of the Israelites. So every one of these stories is Jesus walking into a loaded Jewish cultural situation. It begins with one at Cana. And then at the end of 4, there's the story of Jesus healing the son of the centurion. There's after the after the Samaritans believe, Jesus came to Galilee after being in Samaria. And where does he go? At the end of chapter 4. He goes to exactly the same place that he started, all the way back in chapter 2 to Cana. And then this is where the centurion comes to meet him. Just little clues here. This section begins in Cana and it ends in Cana. Let's keep reading. After this, there was a feast of the Jews. This is going to be a Sabbath. And Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now, he was in Jerusalem, and, there is in the city this by the sheep gate, there's a pool. In Hebrew, they call it Bethesda. And it has 5 porticos, or some of your translations might have colonnades. It's like of an open air atrium with steps leading up to it with pillars. Yeah? It's one of these kind of Greek, Roman style buildings. So, okay, that's interesting. Like, why am I being told this information? But places matter here. So the scene is all about this colonnade. I'm going to just call it the port for short, at the portico. This is the opening scene right here. Then you're going to get 4 stories. This is all going to take place on a Sabbath. That story is going to be over. Look at how chapter 6 begins. So, after chapter 5, Jesus went his way to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. A crowd's following him. Oh yeah, sorry, what time of year is it? Oh yeah, it's Passover. It's a feast of the Jews. And it just keeps on. So all of a sudden the feasts become really significant for this section. This was about something that happened on the Sabbath at the porch, on the portico. Then this whole narrative is going to be told in terms of Passover. Then go to chapter 7 with me. Not Jonah, for John 7. After this, Jesus was up in Galilee. He didn't want to go down to Judea because people want to kill him down there. So, but it was the feast of the Jews. Which feast? It's booths, or Sukkot, or Tabernacles. Yep, I'm going to call it Tab for short here. Tabernacles. Now this is, what's interesting is John's included quite a few different types of stories in this section, but it all is under the umbrella of what happened in Jerusalem during Tabernacles. And then go to chapter 10, verse 22. Now, at the time of the Feast of Dedication, what Jewish holiday is this? The dedication of the temple. In Hebrew, it's Hanukkah. Hanukkah? Hanukkah, yeah? Hanukkah. It's Hanukkah. So this is celebrating the rededication and the purifying of the temple by the Maccabees after the Maccabean revolt about 150 years before Jesus. So he's in Jerusalem for Hanukkah, and it was winter, and he was walking around the temple. Oh yeah, what exact part of the temple? By that place with the stairs and the pillars and the open porch, the portico, right? Do you get it? Yeah, you get it. Yeah. So it's the same principle. He's used, just like Cana frames this section of 4 stories. Now the porch, the portico, becomes the frame for this section of four feasts. So John's done multiple things here. So we've got the wedding, we've got the temple, we've got the rabbi, and then we've got a well, sacred well. Boom. He's just given you the outline. He's just told you the frames of the portraits. There's 8 portraits So even though some of these portraits are complex, like the tabernacle portrait has multiple narratives in this, but he's made it really clear where these are the 4 feasts, these are the 4 Jewish cultural symbols, and he wants you to view each of these as a self-contained portrait. How you guys doing? And so what each of these portraits will then do is they'll pick up key vocabulary from the introduction, and then they'll just kind of advance the light and life theme in this story. And then this one will advance the water theme in this. And it's kind of like, I'm just thinking of this analogy right now. This might be a bad analogy, but it's as if the introduction just pours out a big bag of soccer balls onto a gym floor. And then what he's essentially doing in these portraits is each portrait is simultaneously kicking multiple of those soccer balls down, and they're all moving at once, just at different paces. And each soccer ball is one of these key images of the light soccer ball, and that's the motif. And then it's all going to come to its culmination here in the cross and the resurrection. Are you guys with me? This is how the book works. So, in a way, why I'm spending time with this is because this is the outline John's given the book. So you don't have to make up a new outline, like he's already given one to you. So each one of these stories is pretty self-contained. These 4 are all self-contained. Sabbath, the thing is they're long. They're long. Some of these are 50 verses. And so I've had a crack personally at teaching through a number of these in a Sunday gathering. And I just decided, it's just going to take me a third of the sermon to just read the whole thing. But they're such beautifully crafted stories. They do the work for you. And so that's a decision I made. You're going to have to figure out your own approach to it. But I would recommend to you the outline here. So whether this just becomes 8 different classes or 8 different sermons or teachings, I think that's probably going to be your best bet. How you guys doing? Okay. When am I supposed to stop talking? Okay. All right. So we have till lunchtime, basically. Okay. All right. So here's what I want to do now. I want to go through, look at the rest of the introduction a bit more, because I want to get the whole bag of soccer balls that he's going to pour onto the floor. And then we're just kind of touch briefly on a few of these to show how they advance the different themes that work throughout the book. Sound good? Okay, so we're going back to John the Baptist in chapter 1. There came a man sent from God, whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify about the light. In Greek, you might not be a Greek nerd, but right down here at the bottom, if I take my cursor off the word, but down at the bottom of the screen, it's giving you the Greek word underneath the English word. So the Greek word for witness is martyria. That's where we get the word martyr, martyria. And then the Greek word for testify is martyreo. So this is a challenge in English, because when somebody would be reading this aloud, they would instantly hear these 2 words. They're the same Greek word, just one's a noun, one's a verb. Whereas in English, with this word, we have 2 different roots, 2 totally different words for the noun and for the verb. You guys with me? But it's the same concept, the testimony witness theme. So this is important. Witness, I'm going to call it the witness theme. That's a soccer ball put on the floor. So he's trying to bear witness about the light. Who's the light? The light is the life. Who is the Word? Who is Jesus? So Jesus is the Word, is the life, is the light. Those are all equated. So he came to bear witness about the light so that people might believe. So John becomes the first narrative of somebody bearing witness to Jesus. Now, just to clarify, John was not the light. He's just testifying about the light. See, there is a true light which is coming into the world, and every human is illuminated by means of that true light. What a wonderful image. Every human being finds its meaning and purpose illuminated by the human Jesus. I mean, that's quite a claim. Like, that's just, but there it is. Now, the light. The light was in the world, shining in the darkness. And you remember, the light is the Word, and so the Word is the thing through which the world was made. So here's a funny thing. The light was in the world, and the world was made through him, but how did the world respond to the light when it came? It didn't recognize him. So the world didn't recognize the light as light. It couldn't see the light. So the light is a he here. He came to his own. But those who were his own did not receive him. But there were some who did receive him. And to those who did, he gave them authority, the right to become God's children, specifically to those who believe in the name of the light. Now, not literal children, born of a bloodline, not children born because of the will of the desire or will of the flesh, not because of the will of a human. This is children born of God's will. How you guys doing? This is so dense. I mean, it's like code language almost. Are you with me? It's the code language. So we have, so you have John as a witness. We have the light, and we have all this stuff activated here. But we do have, for the first time, the witness is trying to testify about the light so that people do what? Believe. That was the first time the word believe occurred. We just read it. So believe or trust. So you have witnesses who bear witness to what they experienced in the light, the Jesus they experienced, so that people believe. Now, does everybody believe? No, you have people who are his own who don't receive him. And we're back to here, the dark. The darkness is in conflict with the light. And what is the darkness? Well, it's sort of like there's two, you can believe or not believe. If you don't believe, that's rejecting the light, which is living in the darkness then. But to those who do believe, what are they called? There's another soccer ball poured onto the floor here. What are they called? Children. Children. Or we can say it this way. We can say family. Or if we want to get really Genesis geeky about it here, we would talk about seed. So what this is telling us is that when the light, we're going to meet as a human here in just a couple sentences, the light shines in the darkness, and there's all these witnesses to the light so that people trust in the light. Not everybody does. Some people want to stay in the dark. Not believing is the equivalent of staying in the dark, in the symbolism of the introduction. But to believe, which is living in the light or accepting the light, is to join God's family. And then we have this little commentary on what kind of family we're talking about here. Is this a normal family that God is creating by people who receive and believe in the light? Is it a normal family? Well, if by normal, what I mean is people like a man and a woman have sex, give birth to children who give birth to grandchildren, family, yeah? So that's how families, right, normally work. This is a different kind of family, because we're not talking about people born of bloodlines. We're not talking about people born because somebody wants to have sex. We're not talking about humans intending to build a family. This is a family that's built simply by God's will, by God shining the light into the darkness to create new humans. Family, new humans. Are you with me? This is about a tale of two seeds right here. So think through, there's all of these words are thematic hyperlinks here. Can I think of the book of the Bible, where God is building a unique family based on those who trust and believe? Anybody? It's called the book of Genesis, right? And where there are people who trust and people who don't trust, and how people respond to the light that God shines on them determines what family that they're in. The two seeds. This is all the book of Genesis. This is as good a summary of Genesis as you could want. That God is at work through history, revealing himself, and some people believe and become the vehicle of the line of promise. Some people don't believe, and therefore join the other seed. In the language of Genesis, yeah? God says, I will put enmity between you, the serpent, and you, the woman, between your seed, serpent seed, which is not baby snakes. It's people who give in to the serpent. And her seed, the line of promise. And there is coming a seed of the woman who's going to tromp on the serpent itself. Yeah, Genesis 3:15. And then that goes on throughout the whole book of Genesis, and John's activating this whole tale of two seeds here in John chapter 1. Now, why am I spending so much time on this? One, this is a difficult paragraph because it's like Bible code language. Right? You have to be a Bible nerd to decode what these symbols mean. But also, is the idea of becoming one of God's children or not being one of God's children, is that a thread that's going to come up anywhere here? Totally. Especially right here in the tabernacle. Just to show you how one of these themes works. In John chapter 8, it's one of the conflict narratives where Jesus is having this conflict with people from Jerusalem. And the whole conflict is about light and darkness, about slavery and freedom. And then the whole thing turns into a debate about who is really Abraham's seed. That's what the whole debate is about. Who's Abraham's seed? And who's your daddy? Right? In chapter 8. Because if you're really Abraham's seed, you wouldn't be trying to kill me. You would trust, believe, like Abraham. All right, so this whole thing, and then he just says, well, you're the other seed. You're the other seed. So this is Genesis 3:15 turned into a narrative drama throughout the Gospel of John. And it's going to get continued on through the letters of John, isn't it? About people being born of God. Those who love are born of God. So the letters just keep the soccer balls going down the field. Anyway, there you go. How you guys doing? Okay, let's keep going. Okay, back to the word. We got John on the stage now. He's pointing to the light, and people are going to reject or receive the light. Let's come back to that word. Now, we got John on the stage. Let's put the word back on the stage. You know that word that I was talking about earlier? That is God and is also distinct from God at the same time? That word became human. And it dwelt among us. So dwell, some of you guys know this. Maybe you can see in the bottom there, the little Greek word. You may not know Greek, it's the word skenao. What's the Greek word for tabernacle? The skenes. So Jesus is literally tabernacling. It's the word for tabernacle in the book of Exodus turned into a verb. He's tabernacling. among us, which makes perfect sense of what he says next, because at the end of the book of Exodus, once the tabernacle was completed, what came to hover over the tabernacle? The cloud, the fire glory cloud, called the glory of Yahweh. So the Word that is God and distinct from God became human and was a temple among us. So that when you looked at the human Jesus, who is the physical embodiment of the temple, what is it that you are actually seeing? You're seeing the divine glory that hovered over the tabernacle as a human, the human Jesus. Now, what kind of glory? Well, it's the glory from the only unique Son of the Father. So he's going here. So the Father has one particular Son, the one and only, the unique Son, who's the Son of the Father, part of this thing. And when we looked at this human one, what we saw was the glory of the Father. That's what he's saying. This is very similar to he was God and was distinct from God. Because what you see, you're looking at someone distinct from God, Jesus. But when you see Jesus, you see, and this is laying a thread that's going to come. Do you remember what the disciples say? What is Philip? It's Philip, show us the Father. And what does Jesus say? He's like, oh, I've been with you for a couple of years now, Philip. When you see me, you're seeing the Father. It's the same idea, just different vocabulary. So Jesus, gosh, I'm already running out of room. This is the temple thing. Temple glory, holy cow. So we've got temple and glory. Are these going to be important words in the narrative to follow? Temple. The temple that Jesus is actually talking about was his human body, because the word became human. The glory, we'll talk about glory as we go on, but in the whole narrative arc, this is the moment of Jesus' glory. The whole glory theme, it's the first time the word occurs right here. And glory and glorify, the moment when Jesus is glorified, the hour of his glorification is all leading up to when Jesus is high and lifted up on his throne, which is the crucifixion scene. So this is a soccer ball that's going to lead all the way right here. I need a different metaphor. That sounds a weird thing to say. I was going to say the soccer ball that gets kicked to the cross. That doesn't make any sense at all. I need a different metaphor. Anyway, just let it happen. Let it unfold. Okay, so glory. All right. So you guys with me? Jesus is the temple, tabernacle, as a human. Now this is too good, you guys. Full of grace and truth. Now that's cool. Does that sound beautiful? It's really cool. But why does he say it? Like, what's the point that he's trying to make here? So just pause. Are there any passages connected to the tabernacle, connected to things that happen at the tabernacle, connected to people believing or not believing and seeing the divine glory, where the words were God's grace and mercy and God's truth, right? This is just, if you have the biblical imagination, these two words should be activating something. And in fact, if you're tracking with John, then you know, this is a little chart showing how the tent and the glory is connected to Exodus 25, the glory, the tabernacle. But specifically this line here, grace and truth. Do you remember after the golden calf and Moses steps in to intercede on behalf of the Israelites? Because what does God want to do to his own covenant people? He wants to destroy them for their betrayal of his trust. But then he invites Moses into that painful space, and he invites Moses to intercede. Moses successfully intercedes, and God both brings judgment on the idolaters, but spares the whole covenant family as a whole. And then what God says, he invites Moses up onto the mountain and into the little cave. Do you remember this whole thing? And then God's like, well, you can't really see my face because you die, but I'll put my hand and you can see my back. It's very puzzling images, deep images here of not being able to see God in his true essence, but being able to see true representations of God's character. And so the glory passes by Moses, and what does God say about himself? He calls himself Yahweh, Yahweh, compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, full of covenant love and truth. Grace and truth. So what God's doing in Exodus is he's summarizing his response to faithless humans. I could destroy you. I would be warranted to destroy you. But I made a promise to Noah and to Abraham that I wouldn't. So what instead I'm going to have to do is put up with you and find a way to cover for your failures. This is the golden calf narrative. And it's covered by the mediator, Moses, who puts himself in the place of God's judgment. And he says, kill me. If you're going to kill them, kill me instead. And that successfully persuades God. He accepts Moses' intercession, and then he forgives them and renews the covenant. And when he renews the covenant, what does God say about himself? He says this right here. And so look at what John's saying right here. John's activating all of this. So the tabernacle came among us as a human. The divine glory came among us as a human. He's the human embodiment of those attributes that compel God not to give up on humans. Are you with me? This is so powerful. You might need to spend just like 4 messages in the prologue here, right? But this is so powerful. He's the embodiment of it. And he's going to continue the line of thought. John testified about him saying, oh yeah, there he is, right? That's the one I was talking about. The one who comes after me is greater than me. He existed before me. Now, just think about the fullness that we've all received. If you're a human existing on planet Earth, right, we've all received it, just enormous amounts of divine grace that we are here and exist, right? We all, more grace than we can ever know. The Torah was given through Moses, right? The Torah that set up the covenant relationship for God to partner with humans. Is that a good thing? It's a very good thing. God wants to partner with humans. Page 1, image of God, let's rule the world together, you and me. All right, it's the partnership. But what the Torah does at the same time is expose something that's really wrong with us, is you and I are really unfaithful partners. So the Torah of Moses gives you the framework of the relationship, but what we need is a human who will be the faithful partner on our behalf to take the story to its next stage of fulfillment. And that's, are you with me? That's the train of thought right here. The Torah, the covenant, was given through Moses. But we break the covenant, which is why we need a whole lot of grace and truth. And guess what Jesus is embodied? The grace and truth of the Father. And so the Torah was given through Moses. The Torah says, let's get married. And then when we get married, we find out the horrible things inside of us towards our covenant partner, which is why Jesus becomes the human embodiment of the Father's grace and truth. Now listen, I mean, who can truly understand God in his essence? Like Moses, who's ever fully seen God? But you don't need to understand everything about God to understand the one thing about God that matters to you, which is that he's come among us in Jesus, the only begotten one, and Jesus is the one who has explained the Father to us. How you doing? How you guys doing? This is so powerful. And he speaks in this Bible code language that sounds odd to us. But when you just ponder the Gospel of John long enough, this is exactly what he's talking about here. Is Moses going to come up in the storyline? All this stuff about, because here's the thing, is the people who aren't actually the seed of Abraham, but think that they are, they love Moses. And so they talk about Moses all the time. And Jesus' whole point is like, you guys don't actually understand the Pentateuch. Because the Pentateuch is just trying to tell you that we're really bad partners with God. And we need a human who's going to do something we can't do for ourselves. And guess what? Here I am. I'm here to do that for you. And what do the humans who don't receive him want to do? They want to kill him. And in fact, they do kill him, and he lets them. It's the whole package deal that's happening right here in the, I'm just, isn't this amazing? Yeah, yeah, so amazing. And we're only on verse 18. What's happening right now? Okay. So let me pause. There's the introduction. Do you see how rich, my whole point here is that this is rich. This is giving you all the tools that you need to understand the 8 Rembrandts that you're going to walk into. Every single one of these stories is going to be Jesus says or does something, people don't get it. And it either causes confusion or it causes conflict. And then that conflict is going to turn into conversations that become all of these ways that all of these thematic soccer balls and conversations are going to get kicked down the field of light and life and water and so on. And so you can just read these stories on their own, but the intro is giving you the words and the vocabulary then to make sense of them as you go on throughout. How you guys doing? Good, okay. So I'm just thinking about, we have 2 more sessions after this. That's okay. I'm going to make this one about finishing the prologue, and then we'll do that section and that section. Okay. So there's a whole narrative movement in what follows about the testimony of John. And the people, leaders from Jerusalem come to John and they ask if he's Elijah, the prophet. So many amazing things here. No time. We don't have any time. Hang out with Don Carson's commentary. He'll tell you all about it. What is really important is when John sees Jesus, what does he call him? Calls him the Lamb. I'm out of room. I have like 6 inches left here. So Lamb. Is this an important Old Testament image? Holy cow, right. So beginning where? Beginning where? In the Torah. Go back further. The first lamb. Substitutionary lamb. It's Genesis 22. Right? Where God tests Abraham. He claims the life of his firstborn. And then to test Abraham's trust so that God can provide the lamb substitute. And that whole drama takes place on the mountain that will be called Jerusalem, right? Later on in the story. So that's the first lamb. And then the next lamb is the Passover lamb, which is also God providing a substitute for his claim on the firstborn, isn't it? Yep, it's Exodus. And then there's a whole clan of Israel that gets substituted for the firstborn. They're called the Levites. And they're the people who work in the temple and the priests and offer. And what do? Constantly offering the symbolic sacrifices. It's all connected. And so all leading up then to the servant of Isaiah, who's the king figure from the line of David, who's going to become the silent lamb, who's going to die on behalf of Israel. So there's that whole chain that John's activating here. And you can always tell, if you look in commentaries, they'll give there are about 10 different proposals for the meaning of the Lamb of God. Is it the Passover lamb? Is it Abraham's lamb? Is it the suffering servant? About which hyperlink is being activated here. Are you with me? And people debate these things and write papers and dissertations on them. And I'm now to the point where I'm just like, oh, it's so clearly all of them. Because he's a master, right? He's activating the whole chain of interconnections here. And so if Jesus is the lamb, he's bringing that whole theme of the symbolic substitute to its culmination here. And clearly we're up here again. Because, at what precise moment is Jesus dying on the cross? He tells you. It's as the Passover lambs are being slaughtered in Jerusalem is the moment that Jesus is dying. He puts the chronology right there. So the lamb theme, because the word lamb, if you look for the word lamb, you won't find it in here. You'll find lots of references to blood, though. Lots of weird conversations about drinking Jesus' blood, right? It seems so weird, but it's all coming forward here. All right, so the lamb. So John says, yeah, that's the lamb. That's the lamb. And he points that out to people, And then what happens is that people start following Jesus. When John gives his testimony about the light and about the Lamb, now all of a sudden people start following. Do you see this in the narrative? John's testifying, people start following. So this is wonderful. Jesus' first words in the Gospel of John are, "What do you want?" Right? Jesus turned, there's these guys following him. He's like, "What? What do you want? What do you want?" "Rabbi, where are you staying?" "Oh, come on, let's journey together. Let me show you where I live." And so they came and saw where he was staying. It was about the 10th hour. Oh man, we don't have time for the 10th. It's really interesting though, the 10th hour. So then those two who heard John, so look at the chain. John testifies, here's the light. Here's John. John testifies about the light. Then all of a sudden, the people start following the light. Now you have these people who are like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna follow the light." And then what do these people go do? "Oh, let's go tell some more people." So what do the two do? Well, they go and speak and follow him. And then they go find their brother Simon. "Holy cow, we found the Messiah." And then they bring somebody else to Jesus. So just see the pattern here. When people follow the testimony of those who believe, just stuff happens. People get attracted to the light here. And we're all the way back to here. Why am I telling you this story? So that you believe. So that you go do this thing that I was showing you, that what naturally happens on page 1 is when you believe, you'll start testifying to the light, and the thing that happened back then will just keep on going. So that's what the whole rest of chapter 1 is about, is all of the first disciples getting found and connected to Jesus. Now this is good, this is great. Since I'm committed to the prologue right now, perfect, it's perfect. All right, so the last person who comes to trust Jesus is this guy named Nathaniel, yeah? In chapter 1, this is really cool. So Philip goes and finds Nathaniel and says, "Yeah, we found this one of whom Moses in the Torah and the prophets wrote. It's Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." Famous line from Nathaniel, "Nazareth? Can anything good come out of there?" What Philip says to Nathaniel, he repeats what Jesus said to the first two. Just come and see. Come and see. It's so good. So then Jesus sees Nathaniel and he says, this is a good example of Jesus saying puzzling things, right? Instead of saying, "Nice to meet you," what he says is, "Behold, an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." Okay, that's right. That's okay. So just pause. An Israelite. So Nathaniel, but he's looking. He calls him one of Israel. Who's the first Israel? Who's the first Israel? Jacob. What's the whole story of Jacob about? His deceit. His deceit. Are you with me? So, so you know, I'm not making this up. So this is, an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. In the story of the first act of deceit, remember what Isaac said to Esau: "Your brother Yaakov'd you." Right? It means deceive, because he came with mirma, with treachery, with mirma. Then what's going to happen in the latter prophets, Isaiah through Malachi, you're going to have all of these passages talking about the restored New Covenant Israel that are going to riff off of that. And so here's one example, like Zephaniah, when he talks about the new Israel, the remnant of Israel, they won't be people of deceit. So they're Israel, but they're not Israel. Are you with? It's a new kind of Israel, the new spirit-infused, new heart Israel. So look at this. "Behold, an Israel, but not a deceitful one." This is like the true Israel, the true human partners, the seed of Abraham that I was looking for. Sweet. So Nathaniel said, "Whoa, how do you know me?" "Oh, I saw you earlier today under the fig tree." Under the fig tree. In a new Israel sitting under a fig tree? Anybody? Oh, yes, that's right. Remember, there's that whole thing in Micah and Zechariah about how in the New Jerusalem, under the age of the Messianic king, every Israelite will sit under their own vine and fig tree. It's interesting. Rabbi, you're the Son of God. You're the King of Israel. Oh, you like that thing that I did about the fig tree? Do you believe you're going to see greater things than this? Here, let me tell you something. Amen, amen. That's the key phrase in John when Jesus is going to say the hyper riddle, right? The thing that you have to go for a long walk with a cup of tea and ponder. Amen, amen, I say to you, you're going to see the heavens opened and angels of God ascending and descending. Pretend you don't know this line, right? The heavens open, angels going up and down on what? On the ladder that who saw? Jacob. In his dream that he has in the middle of the desert when he's running away from his brother Esau, who wants to kill him because of his treachery. It's all connected. So, amen. Here's what you're going to see. So I am calling you, the disciples, as the new covenant Israel is coming into existence around me. And you're going to, right? You're already sitting under your own vine and fig tree. It's like the restoration is already beginning. And wow, I believe in you, and so on. Oh, you think that's impressive? Then he's about to ratchet it up to the next level. He's about to take it here again. So he appeals to the story about Jacob, the Israelite, who because of his treachery had to run and sleep on a rock. And then he has a vision at night. And I have just the story here. Jacob had a dream, and behold, a stairway, in Hebrew, a sulam. And the stairway was set on the land, and its top was reaching up to heaven. And then the angels of God are ascending and descending. Now just stop, think about that architecture. You have human space, and then you have God's space connected by a stairway. What is he having a dream about here? In terms of like something architectural elsewhere in the Bible. This temple architecture, going up the stairway. You remember this is why the priests had to wear that underwear? So when they go up the steps, their nakedness is not exposed as they go from symbolic human space to symbolic sacred space. So he's having a dream here, not about an actual temple, but about the heavenly, the cosmic temple, the place where heaven and earth, right, are married and linked together. And so it's this stairway. So, but notice, so that's what Jesus is activating here, that hyperlink. But then who does he put in the slot of the stairway? Himself. But he describes himself with a phrase that is itself a hyperlink to where? Son of Man. It's from Daniel, where the human covenant partner of God has been trampled on by the beast, but is vindicated by the beast and exalted up to the heavenly temple to rule the world alongside God. Do you remember that one? It's Daniel 7. Dude, what's happening here? Okay, sorry, let me just, the way that these is this right here. Is this. This is how these authors are so saturated in the Hebrew Bible. They think, they dream, they talk and they don't just talk, they talk in ways that it's all so closely connected for them. Are you with me? It's exactly what you're seeing here in this story. So this is very difficult to preach, I have found. And I found but you have to try to help people see that's how this biblical literature works. And people get so excited when you show this stuff to them. But I just found you have to just choose one at a time. You know? Don't try and do 10 things. Just show one hyperlink, put the text on the screen, give a funny illustration about your uncle or something, and but if you start showing people this is how biblical literature works, it's coherent, and the themes are compelling, and this isn't just a random assemblage. It all comes together here. So Jesus is the exalted Son of Man who's forming the new Israel, the new seed, the new covenant family. And this is the exalted Son of Man. So the moment the Son of Man is exalted is the moment the heavenly and earthly realms are brought together, right? In God's purpose. And it's all pointing forward to this right here, where King Jesus takes his throne, right? As the Lamb to die for the sins of the world so that humanity can become the seed of Abraham that partners with God to rule the world together. So the whole biblical story is being brought together through these little links right here. Anyway, how you guys doing? Great. Isn't this good stuff? So with this session, we just walked through that's the last sentence of the prologue. And then just on to chapter 2. Here we go. Right? It's just this like a riddle. So and then he moves on to these really well architected sections. So clearly that ends on a cliffhanger. He's just loaded your mind and heart with all these key words and images, and then the rest of it is the portraits that are just going to play it all out. So what we'll do in the next 2 sessions, we'll do more aerial views at different portraits, and I'll just point out cool stuff along the way, and we'll start building the sermon outline. Sound good? Cheers.